What if I told you that the very thing that you thought made you a good person is the exact reason that narcissists keep manipulating you? I'm guessing you've wondered, why do I keep getting manipulated? Why do I end up being used, guilted, or controlled? Well, I'm going to tell you why. It all comes down to one trait. A trait that feels like a virtue, but is exactly what is making you a target. And the worst part, narcissists can spot it in seconds. So what is it? And more importantly, how do you drop it so you never get manipulated again? Well, that is what we're covering in today's episode. Well, hey there. In case we haven't met yet, my name is Kris Reece, and it is my hope to help you navigate difficult relationships and conquer codependency biblically. I also want to invite you to grab a copy of our free Narcissist Survival Guide. It'll be in the link in the description box below. I want you to imagine that you're holding a puppet on strings, and every time you move your hand, the puppet reacts, dancing exactly the way you want it to. Now, what if I told you that to a narcissist, you are that puppet, and you don't even realize it? You see, that one trait that makes you an easy target for narcissists is the one thing they instinctively seek out in their victims, and that is people pleasing. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but isn't it good to be kind? Isn't it good to care about others? And the answer is yes, but only when it comes from a place of strength, not from keeping the peace at all costs, and certainly not from a need to be needed. You see, people-pleasing isn't about just being nice. It's about feeling responsible for how others feel. It's about bending over backwards, ignoring your own needs, and saying yes when you really mean no, just to avoid conflict, rejection, or guilt. And here's the problem. Narcissists can sense this instantly. They know that as long as you fear disappointing them, as long as you feel obligated to make them happy, they can control you. They don't have to force you to comply. They don't even have to manipulate you. You just do it all willingly because the thought of upsetting them feels unbearable. You see, people pleasers think they're avoiding problems, but in reality, they're handing the narcissist the strings to control them. And the more you cater to their needs, the more they demand. It's never enough. And the moment you push back, well, that's when the manipulation, guilt tripping, and emotional mind games begin. But here's the good news. The second you break free from people pleasing, the narcissists lose all power over you. They can't guilt you. They can't manipulate you. They can't use your fear of upsetting them to control your decisions. Now, you may be saying to me, okay, hold on, Kris. I mean, yeah, all right, I extend myself a bit too much sometimes, and yes, I get uncomfortable if someone's upset with me, but I don't know if I'd go so far as to call myself a people pleaser. I get it. I used to think the same thing, but here's the truth. People pleasing doesn't always look how you expect it to. You don't have to be that overly sweet and bubbly, never say no type to be a people pleaser. So let's put this to the test. Let's see if any of these people-pleasing traits sound familiar for you. Number one, you feel overwhelming guilt when saying no. Even when you know you don't have the time, the energy, or the desire to do something, you feel like saying no is wrong. I mean, maybe you feel selfish, maybe you think you'll disappoint someone. So instead of setting a boundary, you cave in and you say yes yet again. And maybe you give up your one free evening to spend time with someone who really could learn how to function on their own. Or perhaps you don't want sushi again this week, but it's easier just to go along. Narcissists thrive on people who struggle to say no. And the more you feel guilty for protecting your time, the more they push your limits. Number two, you change your opinion to keep the peace. You're in a conversation and deep down you don't agree with what's being said, but instead of speaking up, you just smile, nod, laugh, or go along with it. You think it's because you're keeping the peace and maybe just accepting people for who and where they are. But the truth is, you don't want conflict. You don't want the tension. You'd rather keep things smooth, even if it means betraying your own values and feelings. Hear this, my friend. Narcissists love people who are afraid to challenge them. If they know that you'll bend your beliefs to avoid an argument, they'll keep manipulating you into submission. Number three, you take on problems that aren't yours to fix. A friend, a coworker, or even a toxic partner comes to you in crisis, and suddenly you feel responsible for making everything better. You drop what you're doing, you start fixing, you start problem solving, you start coddling their irrational, self-centered emotions, even though it has nothing to do with you. Narcissists love people who feel responsible for fixing everything. Why? Well, because they want to dump their problems onto you, knowing that you're going to carry the burden while they sit back and just take advantage. Number four, you apologize. even when it's not your fault. Have you ever caught yourself saying, I'm sorry for something you didn't even do? Someone else gets upset and somehow you end up apologizing just to smooth things over? It doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if their anger is irrational. You just want everything to go back to normal. Narcissists rarely take accountability, so if you're always the one apologizing, they'll gladly let you take the blame for everything. Number 5, you fear disappointing people more than protecting yourself. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want to be too much. So you stay quiet when something bothers you. You don't speak up when someone crosses a boundary. You shrink yourself down just to make others happy, even when it's destroying you. Narcissists are like leeches. They feed on your fear of disappointing them. And the more afraid you are of upsetting them, the more they'll suck the life out of you. And call it love. So, how many of these hit home for you? Because if you saw yourself in more than one of these, then let me tell you, you're not just nice or accommodating. You've likely been trained to be a people pleaser. And that's exactly what the narcissist loves about you. It's also why they can keep manipulating you. But here's the thing. You don't have to stay stuck in this pattern. You can learn to set boundaries without guilt. You can break free without becoming cold or selfish. And most importantly, you can stop being a target without losing who you are. All right, so now that we've exposed people pleasing for what it really is, let's talk about how to break free from it. Because the truth is, you don't have to choose between being a good person and being manipulated. You can be kind without being controlled. But in order to do that, you have to make 3 major shifts, and they will change everything. And more importantly, this isn't just good advice, it's biblical. So number 1, I want you to shift your mindset. I need you to stop seeing people pleasing as a good thing. Galatians 1:10 reminds us, for now, am I seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I was still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. This verse makes it crystal clear. People pleasing and serving God can't coexist. If your goal is to keep everyone happy, you're going to end up on the outside of the will of God. You see, true kindness isn't about keeping the peace at all costs. It's about walking in truth. Jesus was loving, but he was never a people pleaser. He didn't say yes to please people. He said yes to what was right. So what do we do instead? Well, before making a decision, I want you to ask yourself, am I doing this out of love or out of fear? And if it's fear, I want you to pause because you don't owe anyone immediate compliance. And number 2, stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Matthew 5:37 says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Over-apologizing makes your words lose power. Jesus tells us to keep our yes, yes, and our no, no, because anything beyond that is going to open the door to manipulation. And when you're constantly saying, I'm sorry for things that aren't your fault, you're training yourself to feel responsible for other people's reactions. But here's the truth. You are responsible for your words and your actions, not for how others feel about them. So what do we say instead? Well, instead of saying, I'm sorry, I can't, just say, I won't be able to. Instead of saying, sorry for bothering you, say, thanks for your time. Instead of saying, sorry for saying no, just say, no. Number 3, set boundaries and hold the line. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. The reason so many people pleasers struggle with boundaries is because they fear of what people will think of them. But Proverbs warns us that fearing people is a trap. It keeps you stuck in cycles of guilt and control. True safety, true peace comes from trusting God, not from bending to others' expectations. And boundaries are biblical. Jesus set them all the time. He walked away from people who rejected him. He said no, and even told his disciples to shake the dust off their feet when people refused to listen. So how do you set a boundary without guilt? Well, first of all, expect the pushback. Manipulators are always testing boundaries. It's not a sign that you're wrong. It's a sign they're losing control. Secondly, don't over-explain. The more reasons you give, the more ammo they have to argue. A simple no, that doesn't work for me, should be enough. And lastly, I want you to practice in low-risk situations. Start saying no to small things or with safe people, and then work your way up. Look, at first, boundaries are going to feel really uncomfortable, and you may even feel guilty. But listen, guilt is not from God. 2 Timothy 1:7 tells us that God gives us power, love, and a sound mind, not fear, guilt, and the need to keep everyone happy. And if you're tired of being manipulated and you want to learn the prayer that stops the narcissist dead in their tracks, be sure to check out this episode next. And don't forget to grab a copy of your free Narcissist Survival Guide. The link is down below.